I remember the exact moment it hit me. The moment I realized my parents had already made it perfectly clear who mattered more in this family. I was standing in the living room, half listening as my sister practically danced around, chattering excitedly about the vacation they'd been planning. "Mom and Dad said they couldn't afford 2 tickets," she squealed, like it was the funniest thing in the world. My chest tightened, and a hollow ache settled in my stomach. I forced a smile, but inside, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt before. Every memory of being overlooked, every birthday gift passed over, every word of praise my sister soaked up while I faded into the background seemed to flood back at once. I watched her pack, tossing clothes into her bag with careless excitement, her laughter ringing in the room like a bell I wasn't allowed to hear. I felt invisible, inferior, like the family had drawn an invisible line between her and me, and I was left on the wrong side. As they left, I stood by the doorway, gripping the banister, trying to swallow the sting of rejection. I told myself I'd survive the day, but a quiet, simmering anger had already started to take root, settling into a determination that no one, not even them, would be able to ignore me forever. As I sat alone in my room, the quiet made the sting of being left out even sharper. I couldn't stop replaying moments from my childhood. Birthdays where my sister's face lit up as she tore into the perfectly wrapped presents, while mine were always the leftovers, hastily picked and forgotten by the next morning. I remembered every parent-teacher conference where her achievements were celebrated loudly, while my own successes were met with a nod or a shrug. Even small things like being allowed a later bedtime or a special dessert seemed reserved for her alone. My heart ached thinking about all the times I stayed up late helping around the house, sacrificing little pleasures to make things easier for everyone else, only to be ignored, dismissed, or told I was just doing my part. Those memories weren't just sad, they were infuriating. I realized the pattern wasn't accidental. It was a constant, subtle message. She mattered more, and I was expected to quietly exist in the shadow. The anger mixed with hurt, simmering beneath the surface, a quiet fire that whispered I deserved better, that one day they would finally see who I really was. By the time my sister got home, her excitement was unbearable. She dumped her luggage on the couch and immediately began recounting every detail of the trip. Sun-soaked beaches, fancy dinners, little souvenirs, and endless laughter with our parents. I sat quietly at the edge of the room, forcing a polite smile, but every word felt like a jab straight to my chest. My parents, completely oblivious, kept piling on, praising her for being responsible enough to handle the itinerary, and joking about how I couldn't be bothered if it were me. Each sentence felt like salt in an open wound. I could feel my hands clenching, my jaw tightening, but I kept my voice calm, nodding along, pretending to be happy for her. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. I replayed every slight, every time I had been overlooked, every favor given to her while mine went unnoticed. Anger mixed with a sense of strategy. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I didn't need to yell or confront them tonight. I needed patience, observation, and a plan. Every story she bragged about, every laugh she shared, I stored away, turning resentment into mental ammunition. By the time they left for bed, I already knew. Their favoritism had created a target, and I was going to make sure they would never underestimate me again. I decided to start small, almost imperceptibly. I revamped my wardrobe, choosing clothes that made me feel confident rather than trying to blend into the background. I practiced walking into rooms as if I belonged there, head held high, tone steady, and smile carefully measured. Every day I reminded myself that my value wasn't determined by their approval, and slowly, it began to show. At work, I took on projects that others avoided, staying late to learn skills no one thought I could handle. Promotions and praise followed quietly, never broadcast to the family, yet each success bolstered my sense of self in ways my parents had never noticed before. Meanwhile, my sister continued to float on the surface of privilege, flaunting her vacations and family favors as if effort and talent were irrelevant. The contrast was subtle but striking. Me, quietly accumulating achievements and composure. Her, still relying on what was handed to her. It was intoxicating to realize that while she depended on favoritism, I was building something lasting, something that could no longer be ignored. Every compliment I received at work, Every door that opened felt like a small victory in a battle no one realized was already underway. It happened on a day I had almost forgotten existed. I was buried in paperwork when my phone buzzed with the email notification. I had been promoted, a raise far beyond anything I had expected, along with a bonus that made my jaw drop. My stomach flipped, a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. I could already imagine the conversations at home, the subtle shift in their perception when they finally found out. But for now, no one knew. I kept my celebration private, letting the thrill settle into a quiet, satisfying hum in my chest. The thought of my sister returning to the house, her head held high after her vacation, only to face a new reality where I had quietly overtaken her in success, brought a smirk to my lips. When I shared the news with my closest friend, their astonishment mirrored my own excitement. And for the first time in years, I felt seen, not by my family, but by my own achievements. I imagined my parents' expressions, their confusion at the subtle shift in status, the realization that their favoritism had not determined the only path to success. For once, I felt untouchable in my quiet triumph. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the events, a sense of calm determination replaced the old resentment. The first power reversal was complete. I had the advantage now, and I was patient enough to let it grow until the moment of reckoning arrived. The day my sister returned, she burst through the door like a whirlwind of sun and laughter, carrying with her the scent of beaches, expensive sunscreen, and a confidence that seemed untouchable. She immediately began recounting every extravagant detail: cocktails by the pool, spa treatments, fine dining, and every anecdote was punctuated with exaggerated flair. She laughed at how ordinary I had been while she lived it up, tossing out comparisons like daggers. My apartment, my wardrobe, even my meals, all inferior to her polished, Instagram-ready life. I listened quietly, curling my hands around a mug of tea, forcing a neutral smile, letting each insult wash over me without giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. Inside, however, I felt a quiet thrill. While she was floating in her bubble of privilege, I had quietly shifted the balance. The promotion, the financial bonus, the recognition I had quietly earned, none of it was visible yet, but it had begun to change everything. As she bragged, unaware of my new status, I let my calm mask slip just slightly. A subtle confidence in my posture and tone that hinted I was no longer the powerless sibling she assumed I was. The tension in the room grew, though she didn't notice, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the scales would tip completely. I spent the next few weeks carefully plotting, mapping out every detail of what I knew would be my turning point. Nothing was rushed. Every step was calculated. I started subtly, letting friends and trusted colleagues know of opportunities that could intersect with my sister's social circles, without ever revealing my true intentions. Social media became an ally. I curated posts that hinted at achievements and new experiences, enough to pique curiosity, but never enough to be boastful. Every interaction, every casual conversation, was a thread woven into a larger plan, a network of quiet influence ready to shift perception in my favor. The suspense was intoxicating. I imagined the exact moment my sister's assumptions would collide with reality, and the satisfaction was already half mine. No one could suspect that the meek, overlooked sibling they had dismissed was orchestrating a subtle but undeniable shift in the family hierarchy. Every night, I replayed scenarios in my head, imagining her surprise, my parents' shock, and the room's energy when my plan finally revealed itself. Patience was crucial. Every small maneuver added weight to the eventual impact. By the time the pieces were in place, I felt a quiet power I had never experienced before. The kind that comes from knowing you control the moment everyone else believes they do. The next few weeks felt like walking on a tightrope, each move calculated and deliberate. I accepted a high-profile project at work, one that would place me in front of influential clients, and quietly ensured it succeeded beyond expectation. Small gestures, a new designer bag, a subtle mention of an upcoming conference, a polished LinkedIn post, signaled progress without shouting it aloud. At home, my parents began to notice the changes, though they dismissed them as luck or coincidence. My sister, still basking in her vacation glory, scoffed at my subtle hints of growth, assuming nothing I did could match her effortless privilege. But I let them underestimate me. Every smile, every casual remark about a recent recognition or achievement was a calculated seed, a way to let them believe I was still ordinary, while the foundation of my advantage quietly solidified. By the time I entered the family room with an aura of confidence they couldn't quite place, the first glimmers of doubt began to flicker in their eyes. The tension was barely perceptible, but I knew it was there, an unspoken acknowledgement that the dynamic had shifted, even if they weren't ready to admit it. The moment arrived on a Friday evening. At the annual company gala I had worked toward for months, my sister had been invited along with my parents, thinking it would be just another chance to flaunt her vacation stories and social connections. I arrived quietly, dressed impeccably, carrying myself with a confidence that made heads turn, including theirs. As the awards ceremony began, I felt my pulse quicken, not from nerves, but anticipation. When my name was announced for the Rising Star of the Year award, the room erupted in applause. I walked up to the stage with steady grace, my parents' jaws dropping and my sister's laughter fading into stunned silence. Microphones captured my speech, and every word was poised, humble yet commanding, highlighting hard work, perseverance, and quietly addressing the importance of merit over favoritism, without directly naming anyone. The room buzzed, colleagues congratulated me, and I could see the subtle shift, the first cracks in the armor of her assumed superiority. Later, during the post-gala reception, she tried to reclaim her usual charm, but her comments sounded hollow, and I could sense the envy under the forced smiles. For the first time, she realized that privilege and braggadocio could not outshine skill, determination, and quiet strategy. I had orchestrated a public moment where her superiority crumbled, and the satisfaction that surged through me was intoxicating. Every glance, every whisper in the crowd reinforced that the balance had shifted, and finally, I was the one who commanded attention and respect. The aftermath of the gala was even more satisfying than the moment itself. My sister tried to maintain her usual confidence, but the cracks were undeniable. Colleagues whispered about her inflated stories and exaggerated achievements, and the same friends who had laughed along with her before now exchanged knowing glances when she spoke. At home, my parents' reactions were even more revealing. They asked questions, innocent on the surface, probing beneath, and I answered calmly, letting them see the extent of my hard work and accomplishments. For once, they couldn't dismiss me, couldn't excuse away my progress as luck or coincidence. The quiet respect I had earned in my professional world spilled over into the family, leaving them momentarily speechless. My sister's brash comments now carried a tinge of hesitation, as she recognized, perhaps for the first time, that her assumed superiority was no longer guaranteed. I felt a deep, moral satisfaction. The overlooked child had become the one who set the standards, who commanded attention, and whose achievements could no longer be ignored. The subtle power I had cultivated now had weight and visibility. I no longer had to compete with favoritism or perform for acknowledgement. The recognition was mine, fully deserved, and I held it with dignity. For the first time in years, the family hierarchy felt balanced, and I realized that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about proving, quietly and unmistakably, that I had always been capable, always deserving, and finally recognized. Sitting alone that evening, I let myself finally breathe. The gala, the recognition, the subtle shifts in family dynamics, they were all tangible victories, but what struck me most was something deeper. I realized that for years, I had tied my worth to their approval, measuring myself against my sister's privilege, waiting for validation that would rarely come. Now I understood that none of that had ever defined me. My accomplishments were mine, earned through effort, patience, and determination, not handed down or praised selectively. The quiet satisfaction that filled me wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could rise, not for recognition, but because I was capable. I reflected on every late night, every sacrifice, every small improvement that had brought me to this point, and I felt an unexpected pride swell in my chest. The anger and resentment that had fueled me had transformed into something healthier, a calm confidence and clarity. I didn't need their acknowledgement to feel accomplished. Finally, I could see my own value clearly, and that realization was far more powerful than any applause or envy. The closure wasn't just in their recognition, It was in mine, in the understanding that I had grown beyond needing them to define who I was. Life at home slowly settled into a new rhythm. Though the old tensions lingered like faint shadows, my sister no longer carried the same air of invincibility, but she was still my sister, and I couldn't erase years of shared history. My parents, now fully aware of my growth and achievements, treated me differently. Not with overt favoritism, but with a quiet acknowledgement that I had earned my place. I maintained my dignity through it all, never gloating, never lowering myself to petty victories. Instead, I focused on the lessons I had learned. That fairness isn't always given, that patience can be a powerful ally, and that true self-worth comes from recognizing your own value rather than waiting for others to validate it. Every interaction, every small exchange, was a reminder that I had endured, adapted, and ultimately risen above neglect. I carried a calm satisfaction, knowing that the quiet perseverance, the careful cultivation of my life, had created an unshakable foundation. The moral was clear. You cannot control others' favoritism, but you can control your growth, your choices, and your dignity. And when you do, karma, in its own subtle way, finds its mark. Just as life seemed to settle into this new balance, I caught a glimpse of something that made my pulse quicken. A letter left accidentally on the kitchen counter, addressed to my sister, with a return address I didn't recognize. I didn't open it. Not yet. But the sight alone was enough to remind me that the story wasn't over. There were still secrets, still hidden opportunities, and perhaps even more lessons to be learned. I smiled quietly, feeling that familiar mix of anticipation and calm control. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready. I had the patience, the experience, and the quiet confidence to face it. For now, I let the letter lie, a subtle reminder to myself, and to anyone paying attention, that growth, justice, and empowerment are ongoing journeys. And sometimes, the most satisfying chapters are the ones that haven't been written yet. Weeks later, while organizing some old family documents, I stumbled across something unexpected, an envelope marked with my parents' handwriting, tucked behind a drawer I rarely opened. I didn't look inside, but the curiosity it sparked was impossible to ignore. Whatever was hidden there could change everything again, revealing secrets no one had anticipated. My sister noticed my pause and gave a fleeting, uneasy glance, but I simply smiled, keeping my calm. The truth was, I had learned patience, strategy, and the power of silent observation. And now, it felt like the next chapter was waiting to unfold. A reminder that in families like ours, nothing is ever truly settled. One careful step, one quiet revelation, and the balance could shift again. I leaned back, letting anticipation settle like a slow-burning thrill. Whatever came next, I was ready, and this story was far from over.